Welcome to Story Chats at Inspi Romance. I'm Elizabeth Madry, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Narelle Atkins.
And I'm Valerie Comer. And look, I have Cooney today.
Yay!
Yay.
Milla Holt is back with us today, but we're not focusing on a specific book this time. Instead, we're going to talk about what goes into writing internationally and what we love about reading books that are international to us. We're all four of us are based in different places. So international can mean something different for every single one of us. But I think generically it also would just mean from a generic perspective, not in the United States. But it can qualify for anything. So thank you, Milla, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to kick off our chat with this question. What makes you as an author decide to set a book in a location that's international to you? And Milla, since you do that a lot, let's start with you.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think probably because of my background and where I grew up, and I've moved a lot. Where I live right now in the UK is the longest I've lived anywhere, and that's it's 9 years, and I've never lived anywhere this long.
Wow.
I've always moved a lot. I was always the new kid in school who talked funny because I'd move somewhere, start getting used to the accent, and then move somewhere else, and then sound strange there. So moving has been my life. So when I write international, I just simply write about places where I've got some sort of a connection. It comes naturally to me, and I always have to think about where is home. so yeah, I guess that's just what makes it come naturally for me to write international.
That's fantastic. Valerie, you want to be next?
Sure. I started writing over 20 years ago. Hard to believe. I live in Canada, and I was back then, the only game in town was traditional publishing. And traditional publishers were not really keen in general on stories set in Canada. In fact, really not anywhere outside the United States other than really specific things like Regency England, or something like that. So I figured that my best shot would be to set the book that I was trying to have picked up in the United States. And we literally, I can see the border from where I live, like the cut line on the trees. And so I've been over a lot of, especially the Pacific Northwest states, and 3 of my 4 sisters married Americans. And so I don't feel like the US is a particular foreign place to me. So it was pretty easy to just go, well, if they don't want a story set in Canada, I'll set it like 30 miles south of here, which is northern Idaho. And just, I mean, it's similar enough, right? And then I kept linking series to the old series and back to the next series. And so basically I've just kind of stayed there, except for one exception that maybe we'll talk about a bit later.
Okay. Sounds good. Narelle?
Well, being an Australian, being an Aussie, pretty much anything outside of Australia is foreign and international because we're an island. So we can't just wave to New Zealand from the back fence, if that makes sense. There's a lot of ocean even between Australia and New Zealand. So to me, international is anything outside of Australia, and that includes the United States. So if I'm writing a book set in the US, then I'm thinking that I'm in an international setting to me, but I'm also very aware that the majority of the readership of contemporary Christian romance lives in the United States. So it's home to them. So it's a different mindset, different culture. And so you sort of go into a different place when you're writing in a place that's not home, as Milla talked about earlier.
Okay, cool. So I only have one book that's actually international, I think. Yeah, just one. I have 2.
Well, your Tuscany one is partly.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I always forget about that book when I had up all my books.
See, I knew which one you remembered.
The Ireland one, is it?
Yeah. And I wrote that specifically for a small press, that then they did not choose mine. So but I liked it so much that I went ahead and published it, because I love Ireland. I have dreams of retiring in Ireland. Like I've looked up what you have to do to be able to retire in Ireland and what they require. Like we're looking at that super seriously because it's so beautiful. And maybe living there would be different than, 3 weeks at a time. I'm sure it would be, but I love it. So that's why I wrote a book set in Ireland. But that said, I would love to write more that are set internationally, which I might be skipping ahead. No, I don't think I am. Okay. So because I do love to travel and I love to share things that I've experienced that are outside of normal, for me. And that's why I love to read internationally, which might also, again, be skipping ahead. Sorry.
You're the one who wrote the notes, lady.
I know, but I haven't looked at them for a while. Sorry. Okay, so the next question is, when do you think it is any different than an American choosing to write in a state that's not where they're based? So is writing internationally different than, like, I live in Virginia? If I were to write a book set in Montana, is that different? Yes or no? Why not? What do you think? Milla, you have thoughts?
I think I've never lived in the US, but I have visited several states and they're so different. I've been to New York, Hawaii, Florida, and Missouri, and they're so different. So I could well imagine that
those are all very
yeah, so it's almost like a different country. Apart from, you've got the same currency, obviously, the same there's some similarities, but I think especially if you're writing things like small town stories, I think there would be an incredible amount of difference, and you'd still have to do your research and about the climate, when does the sun set, what's happening in April versus what's happening in November. So yeah, I do think it would be as different as if I tried to write about I don't know, Scotland.
Sure.
So yeah.
Okay. Valerie?
Sort of.
Okay.
I do agree, and I have been to quite a few parts of the US, but there are some things that are more similar across the US, such as the medical system I'm sure there's regional and statewide tweaks and stuff, but the whole system is completely different than what we have in Canada. The military type thing is, see right there, it's Canadian speaking, hello, your military type thing is very different from our military type thing. So there are, you're not going to find me writing a military hero because I don't understand it well enough to write it in a foreign country.
Sure.
So, there's plenty of things that I think are similar enough that I don't have, really any particular worries about that. But I think that there are still a lot of similarities across the US that are not necessarily the same as other countries.
Narelle, what do you think? You could, or you could say, the difference between writing in Sydney versus someplace that's not Sydney, because Australia is really big too. So I don't know any other cities. Perth is in Australia. I do know another city.
Yeah, well, my first thought was maybe, and then if I had to go yes or no, I'd probably say yes, because I know in the States it's different to here. We tend to be more national in the way things are done. So the states have less powers. We're in the States, from my understanding, a lot of the legislation, a lot of the way that life works can be different from one place to another, depending on a whole lot of factors. And there's also historical factors that factor into what's going on in the States as well, depending on where you are. So I'd say wouldn't just be able to move a story from Seattle and plonk it in small town Alabama. if you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even things like in terms of words, like soda, pop, Coke are the three different terminologies for what we would just call soft drink in Australia. So there's all those little things as well. So I think there's differences, but if authors do their research, then all those things and have beta readers that check things and stuff, then all that can be overcome. But Australia is very different. Like North Queensland, far North Queensland's a different world. It's totally different to the southern states.
Okay.
Tasmania, again, being an island state's quite different to the mainland. And Western Australia is very different to the east. There's an east versus west difference there as well.
We have that in Canada too.
Yeah.
I would be hard put to write something set in Quebec or the Atlantic provinces without some visiting and a great deal of research.
Yeah. I mean, we can go to the beach near like the south coast of New South Wales. That's the closest beaches to us. And we don't have to think about crocodiles. That's not true. We don't.
Me either.
If you're in Northern Australia, you've got to think about crocodiles. You've got to think about, they have the stingers. You can't actually go in the water because it's too hot. So the water's so hot in summer that you wouldn't actually go swimming in the water. And I know when we had family living in Broome, they talked about the local swimming pool, they had to cool it. Pretty much all year round, they're cooling the water. You don't heat the water, you cool the water.
That does not happen in Canada.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the outback is
land of the polar bears.
Yep, the outback's completely different to the city. The deserts, again, is different to other parts of the outback where all the cattle stations are, and there's just rainforests, and I mean, it's the landscape is diverse, so that diversity then translates, and our accents are different. We don't all have the same accent either.
Okay.
And if you're a local, you can pick it, and even the way you sort of phrase things and say things is very different as well. And you probably and that's the same as the States, it's the same as Canada, it's the same as the UK, it's the same as everywhere. Yeah
I would say with the US, if you're in the same region, it's the same. But if you switch regions, like if you go from the South to the Pacific Northwest, there's going to be huge differences. Or if you go from New England, even just to like the Mid-Atlantic or the South, that's, so the major regions are going to have big differences.
New England to Texas.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's its own region, basically. Texas is its own thing. So yeah. But if you're in the same region, it's probably close enough that you would not need a ton of research. Cool. All right. So when you've chosen an international location, what do you do to ensure that you're accurate when you're doing stuff there? Like obviously research, like that's the blanket answer. What sort of research do you do? Milla?
Oh, I think that's probably why I only so far been brave enough to write about places I've actually been to, and not just been to, but actually lived, because otherwise I think I wouldn't know what I didn't know, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally.
I wouldn't even know what to start researching, where my inaccuracies were. So like right now, for example, I'm writing a small town story, and I've realized that I've got an issue with the jobs available in this town, because I can't just magic up a career that would not exist in such a place.
Right.
Sure, you can. Fiction. You can do anything.
Sadly, I cannot. If the population is this tiny, it can't have this booming economy with all these things going on. So there are things like that, which at least I find I have to think about, or I can't. My brain won't allow me to continue. To write the story. So I tend to only write about places where I know a little bit, at least enough to start with, and then from there look at what jobs are people doing, what's the weather like, so pretty much.
Cool. Valerie?
I think I've tended to put all my stories, I guess a minor exception coming up, to the Pacific Northwest, where I have traveled through many times, all many parts of Montana and Idaho and Washington and Oregon are very familiar to me. So, so that really helps a lot. And I also count on beta readers, and I count on my editor, and they are, I think, without fail, all American. Occasionally a Canadian beta reader, but it just, I count on them to go, that's not going to work. Like, that's not how our medical system works. So that's not how this or that works. So I find that helpful. And sometimes I realize ahead of time that I might need help with something. And then I try and ask the people who live in that country and particularly in that state, because sometimes that's very specific too, what's needed.
Narelle?
I'm probably pretty much the same as everybody. But the one thing that I think is different that impacts contemporary Christian romance is that Christianity and the way that interacts with culture is not necessarily the same across all countries as well. And I would often say that the United States is 20 or 30 years behind Australia in terms of what's going on. So what was happening here in the 1970s, where most people went to church, if you didn't go to church, you sent your children to Sunday school, that was still going on a couple of decades later, from what I was understanding from writing friends I was talking to when I first started joining all the writing groups. So there's also those types of differences and attitudes towards things like drinking alcohol, there's a whole raft of differences that you can go to if you can cut down into all the different issues as well that also come into play. Yeah, so often I'll hear Australian readers complain about American books being too sanitized, too clean. Would you believe that? Yeah, apparently that's possible. And that's because the sort of the morality and the norms of what you'd expect in North America are different to Australia. So I think that's another layer to look at as well in terms of differences, that if you're going to write a book set in a region or a country, it's very different to where you live, then you also need to look at what's actually going on. How do Christians live in that country? And is that consistent with what your readers would expect? And then how do you actually reconcile the potential conflict and differences along that line as well from a biblical perspective?
And that's
actually, actually what you said has just reminded me of the big artistic license I have taken with my Norway books, which is the number of Christians who would be living in a town of my size. Realistically speaking, in the towns that I write about, they would be lucky to have 50 people in a church. Very, very lucky. And those 50, probably 40 of them would be immigrants. So I have taken a liberty there, because when you talked about what with Christian fiction, obviously you want to have a community of Christians, and in some countries that I write about, that would just not happen. So I have played a little bit with that, and
I have as well.
Yeah.
Even with stories set in the US, I think you would. Yeah.
That's
you
what
would
I was
note
going to say.
That there's more Christians per capita than most averages.
Regionally, you're going to have big differences, and then city versus small town. Like if you're in the South in a small town, then it's entirely possible that like you're still in a place where everything is closed on Sunday because they assume that you're going to church. In anywhere that's not the South, if you were to say that something was closed on Sunday, you would get bizarre looks. Like, why is it? What's so fancy about Sunday? So yeah, regionally there's a big difference.
Yeah. So when did Sunday trading start in the States?
I have no idea.
Because it didn't actually start it started in Australia in the late 1980s, is when they first started opening supermarkets on a Sunday. I remember when that happened because I was working in a small store that opened on a Sunday, and then suddenly the supermarkets also opened.
See, and again, that's going to be regionally. When I lived in Georgia, southern Georgia, which was 1996, everything was still closed on some places. Like I think Walmart was open on Sunday, and the supermarket might have been open, but they roped off certain sections. Like there were no alcohol sales on Sundays, so they would rope off any alcohol areas because you were not able to buy alcohol on Sundays. And that was just in our county. The county next door was completely alcohol free, so you couldn't buy alcohol anytime in that county.
Really?
Really?
Seriously?
Oh yeah.
Wow. Sorry,
they
the
still had-
Aussie here is in shock.
Yeah, no,
like
those
seriously?
they called, I mean, and I'm sure there's still counties in the South today that they're dry counties, and they have what's called blue laws, and there's no alcohol sales. So everybody just goes to the county next door and buys their
That's
alcohol there.
fascinating. I mean, we have that. This is a big debate in Australia at the moment with our Indigenous communities in terms of whether you have alcohol sales or not, but it's certainly got nothing to do with religious reasons.
Yeah.
So
region is going to have a big say in what.
I want to toss something in really quickly. I beta read for a friend who is from the southeastern United States. She was setting a story in, I believe it was Wyoming, and her character went to a Black church in Wyoming that had like thousands of members. And I'm like, oh, honey, I don't think so.
If there's not,
I don't think so.
Yeah.
That might be really common in the Southeast, but you know, just look at a few towns the size of yours in that region and just see. But I'd be really surprised if you're going to find that large concentration there. And she was like, I can't believe it. I mean, like, you're right. And I'm like, it's just not how it is.
You have to look at demographics to make sure if you're specifying ethnicities and making a point of it, you need to make sure that that's like, you can't go to Norway and set like a whole big Asian population probably either. I don't know. So
and if you do, then you need to say why they're there.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was
interesting. No, that's good. So what is the best thing about setting a book somewhere international? What's your favorite thing? Just one. Milla, what do you love about it?
Come back to me in a minute.
Okay. Valerie, what's your favorite thing?
I like selling books, and there's more American readers than Canadian readers. And so that's my favorite thing.
No, that's a good reason. Narelle?
For me, I get as the author to armchair travel somewhere and research. And so I'm like going on holidays with the characters where they live. And that's how I look at it. It's like I'm on vacation with them, learning about life in their country. So I really enjoy that aspect as an author.
Excellent. Yeah, for me, it is that armchair travel again. It's either revisiting someplace I've been and getting to like dig out my postcards or whatever I bought, my souvenirs, or like Google mapping street view tours of all kinds of places and looking.
That is fun. I do that too.
So that's for me. We're back to you now. Sorry.
Yes. I think thinking about it a little bit, I think it's about going back to places that I've lived in. And that's nice, just to a bit of nostalgia. I've been sort of working through almost in chronological order. My first series was set in Uganda, so it was nice to, well, not the whole series, but one of the books, and it was nice to just remember what that was like. And the next series was set in England, where I am now, and that was fun as well. And now of course I'm writing in Norway, so I just enjoy that revisiting places that I've been to. Yeah.
All right, what about the worst thing? Is there something you don't like about setting things internationally?
Valerie talked about selling books.
Yeah.
I think I've limited myself. Well, not limited. What word am I looking at? I think I've restricted myself to only people who might be interested in international settings, because not everybody is. I did have a comment from a reader who said that while she really enjoyed my stories, she found it distracting, the names and the places, and she found it kept pulling her out of the story, and she couldn't keep track of it because she'd be reading and then, ooh, strange name, oh, strange food. So that pulled her out, and I thought that was a bit sad, but it's fair enough. I mean, I understand. I understand that. So I think
that's interesting.
Yeah. So I think in that sense, since most of my readers are in the US, but I've never written an American book, and I won't say I probably won't, but I haven't got any in mind right now.
You have to come visit first.
I have. I think I need to come.
You have to come live here.
But I
I'm
did
gonna
I did
go
write
live
a
in the
book.
States for 6 months.
I did write a book which was which had a little bit in the airport in Chicago,
Okay,
in O'Hare Airport, just a tiny little section there. So,
there you go.
but yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
great.
that's I've done that knowingly. I know I've done it, but yeah. So I just have to take, yeah, take it
Valerie?
on.
And this is where we talk about my one series that's set in Canada.
Yeah.
So the worst thing there is just that people aren't as interested in general. And I think partly with Canada, it's not seen at all as exotic. It's just like that, I don't know, that neighbor next up north that's kind of a little different, but not really that different. And why aren't you just American anyway? So there's that. Now, I'll also grant that this is the Riverbend romance novella series. I did a whole bunch of things wrong. They're short. They're not as connected, at least the first few, as they should have been. They're set in the same town, but I learned as I went along. But the fact that it's set in Canada didn't help it at all either. And it's made me leery of revisiting that setting. And then also, like I said before, I just keep connecting my series to each other, and I just haven't found a good hook to drag everybody north of the border.
Narelle?
I probably think of international contemporary Christian romance as being like a niche of contemporary Christian romance. And so there are less people that are interested, although there will be people like Australian readers love books set in Australia. But as my friend Meredith Resky will say, there's just not enough Australian readers to viably just only write Australian books, if that makes sense. And that's probably the same with Canada. I think the Canadian readers will love books set in Canada that have very high concept Canadian things in it, but that doesn't necessarily translate to other places. And so I think as an
and
author,
we're a more secular nation as well than the US. So our population of Christians,
CCR readers,
is like niched down to being a much smaller number.
And that's the same, I think, everywhere outside of the US, unless you start going to Africa and places like that, where Christianity is growing. But yeah, so I think we just have to make decisions as authors about what stories God gives us and how we use the talents we have to further. Basically, we write for his glory at the end of the day, rather than we're not writing for money. And so we write what God wants us to do and calls us to do, and use some wisdom in terms of where we set the books.
No, that's very true. And I was a little bit flippant earlier saying that I, write American set books because I like to get paid, although it is true also. But it's just, there's stuff in my books that other people will find challenging to start with, because I tend to tackle environmental issues and things like that. And I just figure, pick my battles as to which of the things I want really feel strongly about, and for me, setting didn't win on that.
Yeah
That's fair. We're running low on time, so we're gonna skip some questions, and we're gonna just real quickly choose our favorite. We apparently could talk about this for a long time.
We could do an episode 2,
right? So your favorite internationally set book, and Milla, you're welcome to use one of your own if you would like. That is totally acceptable.
That would be so cheeky. I won't do that.
We like cheeky authors here. It's okay.
Go for it.
I would say I would choose the last one I read, which was by Kristen Fraser, Becoming Us, set in Australia. I want to say it was in Queensland, but I might be lying, so please don't pull me up for that. But I really enjoy that. About I liked reading about just a hospital setting, and I enjoyed that so much. Yeah.
Valerie?
I've read quite a few of Pelican Book Group's Passport to Romance. And so as I was contemplating this, I thought, man, I have read quite a few international books. But some of those have really stuck with me for a long time. And our late friend, Marion Ueckermann, wrote several books for them. And I read, I think, everything that she ever wrote. But the one that stands out to me the most is Helsinki Sunrise which is
Yeah.
set in Helsinki, obviously, and just such the European setting, so many similarities. It's not super foreign to North America, and yet it was. And so I really enjoyed her take on that, and the city there versus the island retreat that her characters go on and stuff. It was a really cool.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just remembering. I have been to Finland, and I remember standing in the supermarket, not knowing, holding a carton and not knowing whether it was milk or juice or yogurt or soda, because the language is completely different.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was utterly foreign, even though it was just the neighboring country.
Right, but in a book you gloss over that.
I know. So now I want to look up that book and read it, because I'm interested now to see how it went.
I hope you'll enjoy it.
It's fantastic. Narelle, what you got?
Well, we're staying in the same part of the world. Poles Apart by Marion Ueckermann, set in Lapland. So it's everything opposite but identifiable. South African heroine going to Lapland for Christmas. I mean, I'm an Australian living a hot summer as well. You've got a white Christmas. You've got the home of Santa. You've got everything that's totally different to my normal real life. And that's probably, I'll always go back to Poles Apart if you were to ask me to pick a favorite international setting, because I just love that story. And I just think it's such a unique place to set a book.
I love that one too. And I think it's one of the few CCR books that I've read that I just feel like was absolutely nailed, pacing and character and everything. Like it's textbook, but not dry like a textbook.
Yeah. So because I'm me, I couldn't decide between two. So you get two. You get a bonus.
All right.
So my first is Manila Marriage App, and it's by Jan Elder, and it's another that is in the Passport to Romance from Pelican Book Group. And it's set in the Philippines, and that's not a place that you tend to, or at least that I've found books set, which I just really loved. And Jan is a friend of mine. I know her. And her brother actually is sort of the inspiration for the hero. He teaches at the seminary where the hero teaches. And so I know that it's very realistic and true to life for the Philippines. So I enjoyed that. And then my other is now I've totally lost the oh my gosh, Autumn Macarthur. All of her Love in Store books, but I was thinking specifically of the Paris one, and now I just know that it was Paris.
Oh, forget Paris.
Is it Forget Paris? Okay, that's what I was going for.
You did that.
I talked myself out of it. I love the setup for that. I love everything about it. I love the bridges of Paris and how she paints them so vividly. It's just fantastic. Autumn's books are some of my favorites as well, because they are mostly set in the UK. And to me, it's just a joy to get to travel. So yeah.
So now you've broken in there. That's what I was going to say. Now that Beth's broken her own rules, Milla should get to talk about one of her books.
Absolutely. No. Not still not one of mine, but I wanted to talk about I've just remembered Tope. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Tope Omotosho. She's Nigerian.
Okay.
And all her books are set in Nigeria, and I've read 3 of them now, and it's just so interesting to me.
That's fantastic.
She puts and they're
can you email
Christian
me
romance? Yes,
or
I will.
Facebook message me a title so that I can make sure I get it spelled properly in the
I will.
show notes.
I will. I've probably butchered it because I've never said it out loud, but yeah, her books are they're very different. They're Christian romance, solid faith, but because they're coming from a utterly different cultural viewpoint, they're very refreshing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to make sure I get that in the show notes. So please send me that information. That'd be fantastic.
Will do.
So Milla, give us a title. Give us one title. If a reader was listening to this episode thinking, what can I read from Milla's that will be very quintessential international?
Probably my very first book would be the most foreign. Okay. Because it's in Uganda, and it's one of the characters is going there for the first time. So I would say Falling for the Foe. It would be the most international
That was
one.
the first book of yours
Yes.
that I read.
Yeah.
It's a good one. Yes,
Oh, thank you.
I enjoyed it.
I agree completely. Well, now
It's
we are
yeah.
kind of over time. So
That's okay.
We can be quiet now.
Milla, do you
Sort of.
have any releases coming up soon? What's your next one? Do you have anything?
I'm working on a freebie for my newsletter, for my
Oh,
mailing
nice.
list.
Okay. Cool.
So God
know.
willing, I'll get that done in April, and then it'll be free for everyone to
Wonderful.
sign up and get unsubscribe if they like. But yeah, that's my next
Don't
my next
unsubscribe.
project.
Get the book
And where is that one set?
It's set in Norway.
Okay.
Nice.
It's
Okay.
yeah, it's set in Norway.
Fantastic. And I also want to remind you that the birthday bash is ongoing. It started Tuesday at Inspi Romance on the blog. So make sure you're stopping by every day and leaving comments so that you get entered for these fabulous prizes that we have.
Some of which are international.
Yes, yes, indeed. Let us know your thoughts on internationally set CCR. And we are grateful that you joined us. Thank you so much. And let us, no, I already said, let us know your thoughts. We really want to know your thoughts today, apparently. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And we will look forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, don't forget to fall in love with a good book. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Try.